call came at 2 in the morning, and Nadia already knew it was not going to be a simple call. She had been awake since midnight, sitting at the kitchen table of her small apartment, staring at a glass of water she had poured an hour ago, and never once lifted to her lips. Sleep, in the past 8 months, had become something she had to negotiate with, rather than something that simply arrived. She would lie down, she would close her eyes, and then her mind, which never truly stopped working, would begin its quiet inventory. Camille's most recent appointment, the medication schedule, the balance in the account they still shared from their college years, the bills that kept arriving, the words the specialist had used during that last visit, words like slow progression and manageable timeline, words that were clearly intended to be reassuring, but landed somewhere else entirely. She had learned, gradually and without much choice, to find her stillness in the space between worst and better. It was not a comfortable place to live, but it was honest. When the phone lit up with Camille's name on the screen, Nadia answered before the second ring. "Cam," she said. "I need you to listen to me carefully," Camille said. Her voice was composed and direct. Not the voice of someone in pain, the voice of someone who had made a decision and had spent real time arriving at it. Nadia sat up straighter in her chair. "I am listening. I received the letter from Crestwood today." The name landed in the kitchen like a stone dropped into still water. Nadia knew exactly what Camille was referring to. Crestwood Financial was one of the most respected investment firms in the country. It had a 2-year graduate fellowship program that accepted only 4 candidates each year, from a national pool that typically exceeded 300 applicants. Camille had spent the better part of a year preparing her application. The portfolio, the research samples, the recommendation letters, the entire package assembled with the focused energy of someone who understood exactly what she was reaching for. Nadia had helped where she was asked. She had proofread, cross-referenced, offered suggestions in the margins. She had sat beside Camille on a cold November night when the final submission went through, and they had ordered food and talked until late about what the next 2 years might look like if the answer was yes. That was before the diagnosis arrived in December and quietly rearranged everything. "Did you get it?" Nadia asked, already knowing from the particular quality of silence that followed Camille's sentence. "Yes," Camille said. "I was selected." There was a silence between them then, not empty, but very full. Both of them were holding the same thought from different angles. The Crestwood Fellowship was precisely the opportunity Camille had been building toward. Candidates who completed the program went on to lead divisions, build departments, and occupy exactly the kind of professional life that Camille had mapped out for herself long before either of them had ever heard the word diagnosis. And now the door was open, at the moment when walking through it was no longer possible. "Cam, that is incredible," Nadia said carefully, "but I want you to take my place." Nadia felt the air in the room change. She set down the glass she had unconsciously picked up. "What did you just say?" "You heard me perfectly well," Camille said. "I want you to go to Crestwood in my place. You use my portfolio, my reference letters, my entry paperwork. You walk in on my behalf and you do the work. And you do it because you are exactly as capable as I am, Nadia. You have always been exactly as capable. The only difference between your life and mine has never been talent or intelligence or dedication. It has been opportunity. And right now, I have an opportunity I cannot physically use, so I want to place it in your hands." Nadia stood up from the table. She walked to the window. The street below was dark and quiet, a few cars moving slowly through the intersection, the night air pressing against the glass. She put her palm flat against the cold surface and felt it ground her slightly. "Camille," she said, "you cannot transfer a fellowship to another person. That is not something that works that way." "It is simpler than you are imagining," Camille said. "The fellowship intake process is based entirely on the submitted portfolio and the recommendation letters. There is no photograph requirement in the initial onboarding materials. My references are people who know you personally. Professor Aldridge, who drafted 2 of my letters, told me last year that if he had to choose between us, he would struggle to decide. I called him yesterday afternoon. I explained the situation. He agreed immediately to rewrite the letters in your name." Nadia turned from the window. "You already called Professor Aldridge?" "Yesterday. He said yes before I had finished explaining. He said, and I am telling you his exact words, he said, 'Your sister has been ready for something like this for 3 years. Someone simply needed to point the door toward her. Nadia returned to the table and sat down slowly. For a long moment she did not speak, because the things she needed to say were not yet fully shaped. There were too many of them, and they were pulling in different directions. "I cannot take what is yours," she said at last. "It is not mine anymore," Camille said. The steadiness in her voice was remarkable. Not forced, not performed. Just the clean, quiet strength of someone who had already moved through grief privately and arrived somewhere on the other side of it. "The moment my health made it impossible to go, it stopped belonging to me in any functional sense. If I let the fellowship return to their second-choice candidate, all of my preparation, the months of research, the refinement, the references I spent years cultivating, benefits a complete stranger. I would far rather that work benefits you. I would rather watch you walk into that building and build something genuine with what I began. I am going to recover, Nadia. The doctors are consistent about that, but recovery takes time, and it takes rest, and it takes the absence of high-pressure performance environments. I need to heal. And you need to stop being the most capable person in rooms that are too small to see you." They talked, until the first gray light was visible at the edge of the window. Nadia said no 4 times. She said she needed to think twice more. She raised every practical and ethical concern she could clearly identify, and Camille addressed each one with the patient, methodical precision of someone who had rehearsed this conversation many times in her head before making the call. By 4 in the morning, Nadia had stopped saying no. She had not yet said yes, but the refusals had been exhausted. "Why are you doing this?" Nadia asked. It was the last question, the one underneath all the practical ones, the real one. Camille was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because I have watched you be extraordinary in rooms that did not deserve you for your entire life. You have been the best person in every situation you have ever entered, and the situation has always been too small to notice. I am tired of watching the wrong doors stay closed. This one is open. Walk through it." Nadia walked through it. Not that night. She needed 2 more days of careful thinking, 2 more conversations with Professor Aldridge, and 1 honest reckoning with her own sense of integrity before she arrived at a position she could occupy without flinching. The conclusion she reached was this: she was not going to Crestwood to perform someone else's ability. She was going to Crestwood to do real work, produce real results, and honor a real sacrifice. She was entering through a door held open by someone who loved her. That was different from dishonesty. That was closer to inheritance. She accepted the place. The practical arrangements were handled quietly over the following days. Professor Aldridge rewrote the recommendation letters in 3 days, inserting Nadia's name and adjusting specific references to align with her work history, rather than Camille's. The portfolio, which Nadia reviewed line by line and supplemented with her own analysis and current market data until it genuinely reflected her thinking, was submitted in the revised form. A welcome letter arrived from the Crestwood Fellowship Coordinator, addressed to Nadia Reeves, outlining the start date and orientation details. Camille read it aloud over the phone. Then she was quiet for a moment. "Are you all right?" Nadia asked. "More than all right," Camille said. "I am just very proud. I did not expect to feel this proud. It is almost overwhelming." Nadia drove to Camille's apartment that evening and stayed until past midnight. They did not spend the evening discussing the fellowship or the diagnosis or any of the complicated things. They talked about a film they had both watched separately and compared notes. They talked about a restaurant they had visited years ago and disagreed, warmly, about which dish had been better. They talked about their mother's particular way of making tea, and the fact that neither of them had ever been able to replicate it correctly, despite multiple attempts. The kind of conversation that 2 people who are very close to each other have when they understand, without saying so, that some evenings are simply for being in the same room. When Nadia stood to leave, Camille walked her to the door. "Go and be brilliant," Camille said. Nadia hugged her. She held on for a moment longer than usual. Then she let go, walked down the hallway, and stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. She allowed herself exactly 3 minutes of tears, timed precisely, the way she had always managed difficult emotions, giving them a defined space, so they did not spill into the spaces where she needed to function. Then she stopped, straightened her jacket, and told herself the thing she had always told herself when the weight of something felt excessive: there is work ahead of you. Focus on the work. She had always been good at that. The 2 weeks before her start date were intensive. She treated preparation as the only thing that mattered. She reviewed the portfolio she had submitted, until she knew every line of it as naturally as she knew her own thinking. She studied Crestwood's public financial documents for the previous 6 years. She memorized the senior partnership structure, the departmental organization, the major client categories the firm acknowledged in its public materials. She read every interview she could find with Crestwood's leadership. She read industry coverage of the firm's investment decisions, trying to understand not just the what but the why. What philosophy drove their choices? What kind of analytical framework they rewarded? What kind of thinking was likely to be noticed by the people who would be evaluating her? She prepared the way she had always prepared for things that genuinely mattered, completely. On the evening before her first day, she pressed the dark blue jacket she had decided to wear, and set out her bag with everything she would need. She set 2 alarms. She called Camille at 9, and they spoke briefly, the conversation warm and easy, and without ceremony. "Sleep," Camille said. "I will. You are going to be fine. I know. Call me after. I will call you the moment I am out of the building." She slept well. She had done the preparation. She knew what she was walking toward, and underneath the complicated layers of borrowed entry, and her sister's sacrifice, and the uncertainty of what the next 2 years would require of her, she was, simply and genuinely, ready. The morning was bright and clear. She arrived in front of the Crestwood Financial Building at 8:40, 20 minutes before she was required. She stood on the pavement and looked up at it for a moment. It was tall and gray and composed, not flashy, not trying to impress. The building had the particular quiet authority of something that had been the best at what it did, for long enough to stop announcing it. It had no interest in how much this moment meant to the woman standing in front of it. It was simply a building, waiting to be entered. That indifference was, unexpectedly, steadying. She walked in. The lobby was cool and orderly, with clean light and the faint smell of paper and fresh coffee. The security desk attendant, whose badge said George, processed her check-in with practiced efficiency and directed her to the 14th floor. The elevator was prompt. The corridor when she stepped out was quiet and well lit. A woman named Ruth was waiting near the end of it. Ruth was the fellowship program coordinator, mid-40s, short brown hair, and the kind of warm, direct manner that immediately communicated someone who was very good at her job, and had long since stopped pretending the job was anything other than genuinely satisfying. She shook Nadia's hand firmly and said, "We have been looking forward to having you. Your portfolio generated the longest conversation in our selection meeting this year. Welcome to Crestwood." "Thank you," Nadia said. "I am very glad to be here." Both statements were true, entirely, without qualification, true. Ruth introduced her to the other 3 fellows, Oliver, who moved quickly and was already asking questions before any of the answers were available, Clara, who was quiet and precise, and had the patient quality of someone who thinks carefully before she speaks and tends to get it right, and Paul, who carried the barely contained energy of a person who has wanted something for a very long time and is still adjusting to the reality that he has it. Nadia liked all 3 of them immediately. She settled into the small shared office she had been assigned, pulled up the first orientation assignment, and within 12 minutes had formed the structural outline of an approach she already knew, without arrogance, was well above the standard expected. She did not think about that. She simply kept moving. She had always been this way, efficient and focused and honest about the quality of her own thinking, without ever needing to announce it. This was who Nadia Reeves had always been, a person who found the work and gave it everything, who had always been this capable, in rooms that were consistently too small to see her clearly, who had waited, without bitterness and without apology, for a room that was large enough. This was that room. She intended to fill it. That evening, at 5 minutes past 5, she walked out of the Crestwood building and sat in her car in the parking structure and called Camille. "How was it?" Camille asked. "The building smells like ambition and paper," Nadia said. "The work is real, the people are sharp, and I belong there." There was a pause, warm and full. "Yes," Camille said, "you do." Nobody talked about Damien Cross the way people talked about other executives. They did not say he was talented, because talented was too small a word and also too simple a category. They did not say he was driven, because driven implied there was somewhere he was still trying to reach, and Damien Cross had long since reached every destination that had once seemed remote. They said, when they said anything at all, that he was the kind of person who changes the shape of whatever room he is standing in. Not through performance or deliberate authority, but through something more basic than that. Something that comes from actually being the most capable person present and never needing to perform it. He had built Crestwood Financial from a respectable mid-tier firm into one of the most recognized investment houses in the country in just under 9 years. He had done it through a combination of analytical precision, an almost disturbing capacity for risk assessment, and a quality that was harder to name, a kind of clarity about what mattered and what did not. He had a way of looking at a problem and immediately identifying the thing everyone else was carefully avoiding looking at. He then went directly toward that thing, without flinching, while the people around him were still arranging themselves. He was 32 years old. He had the focused intensity of someone much older, and the health of someone who had been deliberately disciplined about every choice he made, including the ones that had nothing to do with business. He did not manage the Crestwood staff. He led them, which is a different thing entirely. Management implies administration. Leadership implies direction. People who worked under Damian Cross did not need to be told what to do twice. They did not need to be told what the standard was. The standard was visible, daily, in everything he produced and everything he expected. You either rose to it or you found, within a few weeks, that you had been quietly directed toward a firm that was better suited to people who preferred a more comfortable pace. The senior partners respected him completely. The junior staff was, in varying degrees, intimidated by him, in the way that people are intimidated by someone who is simply very clear about what they expect, and has zero patience for anything that falls short of honest effort. His personal assistant was a man named Patrick, organized, discreet, and experienced enough after 4 years in the role to predict Damian's priorities before they were stated. Patrick ran the calendar, managed the flow of information into and out of Damian's office, and served as the first filter through which almost everything in the building passed on its way to the man at the top. Nadia had been in the building for 2 weeks before she registered Damian Cross as more than a name in an organizational chart. She had seen him twice from a distance, once crossing the lobby on a Thursday morning, moving at the pace of someone who had 14 things already in motion, and had added the act of walking to the list. Once at the end of a corridor on the 3rd floor, speaking quietly with one of the senior partners while both of them studied something on a tablet screen. Both times, Nadia had observed him the way she observed everything, carefully and without projection. She noted that he moved efficiently, that the people around him adjusted their posture slightly when he was nearby, that he did not appear to notice or care about either of those things. She registered these observations, filed them accurately, and returned her attention to what she was doing. She was not afraid of Damian Cross. She was also not interested in him in any particular way. She had come to Crestwood to work, and the head of the firm was a person whose existence she was aware of in the same factual way she was aware of the building's height or the orientation schedule. He was a relevant feature of the environment, nothing more. Or so she intended. The 3rd week of the fellowship brought the first major departmental rotation. Each fellow was assigned to shadow a different team for 4-day periods over the following 3 weeks. Nadia's first rotation was in the risk analysis department, led by a senior partner named Helen. Helen was in her late 50s, meticulous, and had the quality of someone who had been underestimated early in her career, and had spent the following 30 years being completely indifferent to other people's opinions as a result. She ran the risk analysis department with the kind of calm authority that does not announce itself. She simply worked at a level that made the standard obvious to anyone paying attention. Nadia paid attention. Within the first 2 days of the rotation, Helen had noticed. On the 3rd day, Helen set aside a complex analysis document that had been sitting unfinished on her desk, a client portfolio risk assessment that had been stalled because 2 different analysts had arrived at contradictory conclusions, and neither could identify where the divergence had originated. She placed the document on Nadia's desk with no instruction beyond, "Tell me what you think is happening here." Nadia read through both analyses. She found the divergence point in 40 minutes. It was a methodological inconsistency in the way one analyst had weighted short-term volatility against long-term structural risk, a subtle error that only appeared problematic when you read both documents simultaneously and held the assumption frameworks beside each other. Most people would have read them sequentially and missed it. She wrote up her finding in 2 clean paragraphs and placed it on Helen's desk. Helen read it. She looked up. She said, very simply, "That is exactly right." She did not add anything to that. She did not offer excessive praise or make a ceremony of it. She simply acknowledged the accuracy of the finding and returned to her own work. But Nadia noticed that the document went into an internal folder that afternoon, rather than continuing to sit unresolved on the desk. And she noticed that Helen, from that point forward, occasionally asked her questions that were not part of the standard rotation curriculum. The other fellows were doing well. Oliver was quick and creative, producing ideas rapidly, and sometimes refining them just as rapidly. Clara was precise and thorough, always delivering exactly what was asked, and occasionally a bit more. Paul worked hard, and was beginning to find his confidence in environments that initially made him nervous. Nadia's work was something different. It was not loudly different. She did not produce more volume than the others, or work visibly longer hours. The difference was in the quality and nature of her thinking, an ability to go directly to the center of a problem, without circling it first, to see the structure of something complex, without needing to build up to it slowly. She asked questions that advanced the conversation rather than filling time. She produced work that did not require revision. By the end of her first month, Ruth had mentioned her name to Helen, and Helen had mentioned her name to one of the other senior partners. By the end of the second month, her quarterly risk report, the first major independent assignment given to all 4 fellows, had been flagged internally for additional review. Not because something was wrong with it, because something was notably right. It reached the desk of the firm's strategy review team. It was discussed in a meeting Nadia was not present at, and somewhere in that chain of movement, it found its way to the 14th floor, to the office at the corner of the building that had a different quality of silence from the rest of the floor. Damien Cross read Nadia's quarterly report on a Tuesday afternoon. He read it once quickly, the way he read most things, absorbing structure and direction. Then he read it again slowly, which was not how he read most things. He was looking for the flaw, the assumption that hadn't been tested, the place where the argument stretched further than the evidence supported. He found none. The report was technically clean, the reasoning tight, the conclusions proportionate to the data used. He turned to the cover page and looked at the name. He did not recognize it immediately. Then he placed it, one of the 4 new fellows in the 14th floor program. He had been told about them during the intake briefing in the way he was told about all new staff, briefly, factually, without expectation that he would need to think about them again for at least a year. He placed the report on the left side of his desk, in the section where documents he intended to follow went, and he moved on to the next item. But the name stayed. He was not the kind of man who forgot names he had a reason to keep, and he had just been given a reason. His assistant Patrick noticed the report on the left side stack the following morning, which was unusual. The left stack was for things that required direct follow-up. Fellows' quarterly submissions did not typically end up there. Patrick filed the information away in the orderly mental catalog he maintained about Damien's habits and preferences, added nothing to it verbally, and went about his day. Meanwhile, Nadia Reeves was on her 3rd departmental rotation, working through a market trend analysis that she had been assigned as part of the portfolio strategy team's current project load. She was sitting beside Clara in the open workspace of the 12th floor, both of them quiet, both of them working, the morning moving forward at the particular pace of days when the work is genuinely absorbing. Oliver appeared at the edge of their workspace around 11. "Have either of you heard anything about the quarterly reviews?" he asked. "They went to the strategy team for assessment," Clara said without looking up from her screen. "Someone told me one of them got flagged for special mention," Oliver said, looking at Nadia. Nadia did not look up from her screen either. "I heard that as well," she said. "I do not know the details." "It was yours," Oliver said. She looked up then. Oliver's expression was not unkind. He was curious, the way he always was, but also straightforwardly honest about it. "If that is the case," Nadia said, "then I am glad the work landed well. Was there something specific about the portfolio strategy framework you wanted to discuss?" Oliver blinked. Then he laughed, briefly and genuinely. "Right," he said. "Back to the work." Nadia returned to her screen. She genuinely did not spend time thinking about the flagged report, because there was nothing productive to be gained from thinking about it. The report had been her best effort. It had been an honest representation of her analysis. Whatever was made of it was out of her hands. The next piece of work was in front of her, and the next piece of work was what she could actually control. She was thinking about the market trend analysis. She was thinking about a specific inconsistency she had noticed in the sector data, a pattern that suggested something about short-term movement that the broader market commentary had not yet fully registered. She was drafting the framing for how to present this finding in a way that would be both clear and supported by the underlying numbers. She was not thinking about Damian Cross. She was not thinking about the fact that her name was on a sticky note on the side of his monitor. She was not thinking about him at all. But he was already thinking about her. Not in any specific or personal way, not yet. At this stage, it was purely professional. A name attached to a quality of work that had distinguished itself cleanly from the field. An analytical voice that had a particular quality of honesty and precision that he did not encounter frequently. He was interested in it the way he was interested in any resource that showed genuine quality, objectively, accurately, without sentiment. He asked Patrick, on Wednesday morning, to pull the complete orientation file for Nadia Reeves. Patrick did so and placed it on Damian's desk by lunchtime. It contained her fellowship application materials, her academic record, her reference letters, and the brief professional background summary that all fellows submitted during onboarding. Damian read it over 20 minutes. He was looking at the consistency of the profile, whether the portfolio and the report reflected the same person, or whether the report was a one-time performance above the usual standard. They reflected the same person, consistently and clearly. He placed the file on the left stack as well, and did not say anything further about it to Patrick. But the name was no longer just a note on the edge of his monitor. It had become a category in his mind. A person whose output he was now tracking, not consciously or deliberately, but in the automatic way that a mind trained to assess quality begins to follow the source of quality once it has been identified. He would not have called it curiosity. He would not have called it interest. He would have called it professional awareness of a promising resource. He would have been wrong about that. But he did not know it yet. The morning Damian Cross called Nadia into his office, she had been at Crestwood for exactly 3 months and 2 days. She knew the number because she marked the months privately, in the small journal she kept on the nightstand beside her bed. Not a diary, not a record of feelings, but a functional log of her own progress. What she had done each week, what she had learned, where her thinking had advanced or stalled or surprised her. She had been keeping this kind of log since she was 19 years old. It was the kind of discipline that does not come from ambition. It comes from caring about your own development honestly, without needing anyone else to assess it for you. 3 months and 2 days in, she was halfway through the second rotation block. She had completed risk analysis, portfolio strategy, and was 2 weeks into client relations. The client relations team was led by a sharp and measured man named Nathan, who had been with Crestwood for 11 years, and had the polished, quietly observant quality of someone who had learned everything about how people behave when money is at stake. Nathan had been watching Nadia since her first day in his department. Not because she was doing anything unusual, precisely because she was not. While the other fellows who rotated through his team tended to arrive with either excessive confidence or visible anxiety, both of which created friction with clients and within the team, Nadia arrived and simply worked. She listened in client calls without performing attentiveness. She took notes without making a show of taking notes. She asked questions when questions were warranted, and she did not ask questions when they were not. She had the quality, rare in professionals at any level, of being fully present without being intrusive. On her 8th day in the client relations department, a situation arose that Nathan had not planned for. A long-standing client, a senior executive at a manufacturing group that had been with Crestwood for 6 years, called for an urgent review of his firm's investment allocation. The call had been scheduled with one of Nathan's senior analysts, who had been pulled that morning into an emergency internal meeting. Nathan was in back-to-back sessions and could not cover the gap. He scanned the room, assessed his options in approximately 4 seconds, and made a decision that he would later describe to a colleague as either a calculated risk or a fortunate accident. He asked Nadia to take the call. She looked at him for one measured moment. "I will need 5 minutes to review the account overview before I get on the line," she said. "You have 3, Nathan said. She took 4, covered the essential account history, and joined the call. The client's concern was specific and technical, a question about how a recent shift in commodity pricing would affect the risk profile of the current portfolio weighting. It was a real question, requiring a real answer, grounded in current data and clear reasoning. It was not a beginner-level query. Nadia answered it, clearly, directly, and without padding the response with reassuring language that contained nothing of substance. She told the client what the impact was, what the data showed, what the options looked like, and what she personally recommended as the most proportionate response given the firm's stated risk tolerance. She was precise without being cold. She was direct without being abrupt. The call lasted 19 minutes. When she came off it, Nathan was standing nearby. He had been listening. "He asked for your name," Nathan said. "I gave it to him," Nadia said. Nathan studied her for a moment. "That answer you gave him, the one about reweighting the commodity-adjacent positions, where did that analysis come from?" "The secondary data in the account overview referenced a Q2 pattern. I followed the thread forward. The conclusion seemed reasonably clear. That conclusion is what my senior analyst was going to come to after an additional review session," Nathan said. Nadia did not respond to that. There was nothing useful to say. Nathan nodded once, as though confirming something he had been forming an opinion about. Then he returned to his desk and picked up his phone. 2 days later, Nadia's name appeared in a brief internal note that Nathan sent to Helen and to Ruth. The subject line said nothing dramatic. It said, "Fellow assessment, early feedback." The body of the email said, among other things, that Nadia Reeves demonstrated a level of independent analytical thinking and client-facing composure that exceeded the standard expectations for the fellowship program. He recommended that she be considered for early exposure to the firm's strategic review process. The email moved upward in the organization, which is the direction that recommendations about genuinely strong people always move. It reached Patrick's desk on a Thursday morning. Patrick read it, noted it accurately, and placed it on the top of the daily summary he prepared for Damien each morning. Damien read it before 9 o'clock. He put down his coffee, read the note a second time, and made a decision. He asked Patrick to arrange a brief meeting with Nadia Reeves for that morning. No agenda item specified, no preparation materials sent, just a calendar notification that said, "Meeting with Mr. Cross, 11 a.m., his office." The notification reached Nadia's calendar at 8:47. She saw it while reviewing a document at her desk and felt, very briefly, the particular alertness that comes when something unexpected enters the day. She set the feeling aside. She finished reviewing the document. She made a note of 2 questions she wanted to resolve before the end of the week. Then she stood up, straightened her jacket, and prepared herself the way she prepared for everything, by deciding clearly what she knew, what she did not know, and what she was not willing to pretend about either. She arrived at the executive floor at 10:55. Patrick greeted her at the door of the outer office with the efficient pleasantness of someone who had been at this post long enough to have a calibrated sense of which visitors were comfortable and which were not. He offered her water, which she declined, and asked her to take a seat, which she did. She sat straight and was still in the way of someone who does not need movement to manage their nerves, because her nerves were not something she needed to manage. She was alert. She was not anxious. At 11 o'clock exactly, Patrick indicated that she could go in. The inner office was large and orderly, in the way of a room occupied by someone who found disorder genuinely inefficient, rather than simply aesthetically unpleasant. There were no decorative items on the desk. There were no plants. The wall behind the desk held a simple display of the firm's performance charts. The chairs opposite the desk were good quality and practically placed, not arranged to impress. Damien Cross was standing near the window when she came in. He was taller than she had registered from a distance. He had the particular kind of physical presence that comes not from size but from complete self-possession, the quality of a person who knows exactly where they are in every room and has no uncertainty about it. He was wearing a dark suit with no decoration. His expression, when he turned from the window, was neutral, in a way that contained a great deal, something evaluative and direct, and neither warm nor cold. He gestured toward the chair. She sat down. He sat across from her. He looked at her with the same attention he gave everything that warranted it, direct, unhurried, and completely without social performance. "Tell me," he said, "how you identified the Q2 commodity pattern in the Hargreaves account. Walk me through the reasoning." It was not a greeting. It was not an introduction. It was a test, delivered in plain language, and they both understood that. Nadia walked him through it. She did so without preamble and without qualification. She explained the specific element in the secondary account data that had flagged her attention, the sequence of reasoning that had led from there to the conclusion she offered the client, and the one assumption she had made that could, under a different set of circumstances, require revision. She included the assumption because not including it would have been less than honest, and she was not willing to be less than honest in a room where the point was accuracy. Damien listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, there was a silence of approximately 4 seconds. In most professional environments, 4 seconds of silence from a senior leader is long enough to produce visible discomfort. Nadia sat through it the same way she had sat through the rest, still and clear. "You included the assumption," he said. "It was relevant," she said. "Most people don't volunteer their weak points. It is not a weak point. It is a known variable. There is a difference." Another silence. Different from the first one. He studied her for a moment, in a way that was not impolite, but was very thorough. He had the experience of someone who had evaluated a very large number of people across a career spent in high-stakes environments, and he was applying that experience directly. "You are not like the others in the program," he said. She held his gaze without particular expression. "I am not trying to be." "That is not what I mean," he said. "I am not making a social observation. I am making a professional one." "I understood what you meant," she said. "My answer was the same." Another pause, longer this time. He stood, which indicated the meeting was ending. She stood as well. The entire exchange had lasted 7 minutes. "Thank you for coming up," he said. "Thank you for the time," she said. She walked out through the outer office, past Patrick's desk, into the elevator, and back to the 14th floor. Clara was at her desk when Nadia returned. Oliver was on the phone across the room. Nadia sat down, opened her work, and continued. She did not tell anyone what had been discussed in the meeting. She did not analyze it aloud, did not compare notes with Oliver or Clara about what it might mean, or what it might lead to. She treated it as a professional exchange, which was exactly what it had been, and she returned her attention to the work in front of her. She called Camille that evening, as she did every evening after something significant. "How was today?" Camille asked. "I was called to the executive floor," Nadia said. "Damien Cross wanted to walk through my reasoning on the Hargreaves account response." Camille was quiet for a beat. "Damien Cross personally?" "Yes." "Nadia." "It was a professional assessment. He wanted to verify the quality of the thinking." "Nadia, do you understand what it means that the managing partner of a firm that size personally summoned a 3-month fellow to discuss her analytical process?" "It means the work was noticed," Nadia said. "It means considerably more than that," Camille said, with a warmth in her voice that was half pride and half something else entirely. "Don't," Nadia said, with the tone of someone who knows exactly where a sentence is going and does not want to arrive there. Camille laughed. It was a good laugh, full and easy. "I am simply saying," she said, "that the work is landing." "The work is landing," Nadia agreed. "Good," Camille said. "Keep going." Nadia kept going. But something had shifted in the building, in a way that had nothing to do with the quarterly report, or the Hargreaves call, or any single piece of work. It was the kind of shift that is difficult to name, because it does not happen at a specific moment. It is not a decision. It is more like a subtle change in the pressure of the air, the way weather changes, not when the rain begins but in the hour before, when everything is still dry, but something in the atmosphere has already moved. Damien Cross had sat in his office, after Nadia left, for 5 minutes longer than he typically sat after any brief meeting. He had not reviewed the next document immediately. He had looked at the wall chart. He had thought about the way she had said, "It is not a weak point, it is a known variable." He was not sure why that sentence was still in his mind 4 hours later. He put it aside efficiently and moved on. But it was there the next morning as well, which was unusual. He was not a man whose thoughts circled. He was a man whose thoughts moved forward. That was the feature of his mind that had carried him to the position he occupied. He processed, he decided, he moved. He did not return to things that had already been filed. The sentence did not file cleanly. He left it where it was and went about his day, which contained 14 separate demands on his attention, and moved at the pace his days always moved, quickly, intensely, without gaps for anything that was not directly relevant. And yet, somewhere at the edge of the afternoon, Between a call with a partner at a New York firm and a review of the upcoming board agenda, he found himself wondering, briefly and without specific purpose, what Nadia Reeves was working on today. He did not assign meaning to the thought. He simply noted it and moved on. But it had happened, and it would happen again. There is a particular kind of attention that looks like professional respect from the outside, and is, on the inside, something more complicated. It starts as honest observation, a genuine, well-founded acknowledgement of quality. It is not manufactured or indulgent. The quality is real, the attention is justified, and there is nothing in the early stages that would cause anyone looking closely to raise an eyebrow. But it moves, quietly, by degrees. The first indicator that something had moved in Damien Cross was so small that Patrick almost missed it. 6 weeks after the brief meeting on the executive floor, Patrick was preparing the weekly project allocation sheet, the internal document that outlined which team members had been assigned to which client reviews, strategy sessions, and cross-departmental work groups for the coming week. He had been preparing this document every Thursday for 4 years. It was administrative work, thorough and routine. Damien reviewed the draft allocation sheet that Thursday morning as he always did. He made 2 adjustments, as he sometimes did when he thought a team composition could be strengthened. The first adjustment was moving a mid-level analyst from one client review to another, because the first had a less technically complex issue that could be handled without him. This was the kind of adjustment Damien made regularly, and with good reason. The second adjustment was adding Nadia Reeves's name to the strategy review session scheduled for the following Tuesday. The session involved 3 senior analysts, 1 partner, and a deep dive into the rebalancing options for a major institutional client. It was not a session that had ever included a fellow before. The usual framework kept fellows in the standard rotation until their first year was completed. Patrick noted the addition, noted its departure from the standard framework, and did not comment on it. He adjusted the document and sent it out. When the updated allocation arrived in Nadia's calendar on Thursday afternoon, she looked at it with the same steady attention she gave all professional developments. She registered the unusual nature of it. A fellow invited into a senior strategy session was outside the normal pattern, and she prepared for it accordingly. She pulled the relevant client file and reviewed the current portfolio structure, the existing strategy recommendations, the risk profile, and the client's publicly stated financial objectives. She prepared the way she always prepared, thoroughly and without assumption. She attended the Tuesday session. She did not speak first. She listened for 40 minutes to the analysis and discussion building around the table. 3 senior analysts who were technically very capable, and a partner named Gary, who had the confident drawl of someone who has been right enough times to stop worrying about being wrong. She observed the shape of the argument being constructed. She noticed where the foundation had a soft point. Not wrong exactly, but built on an assumption that the current data did not fully support. She noted it on the paper in front of her. When Gary paused for general input, she said, clearly and without preface, the long-term growth projection, in the current recommendation, assumes a regulatory environment that 2 recent government announcements have already begun shifting. If the shift continues on the current trajectory for another quarter, the projection's upper range becomes optimistic by roughly 9 to 12%. The room was quiet for a moment. Gary looked at her. He was not accustomed to being interrupted by fellows in sessions they were not normally invited to. He was, however, a man who had been in finance long enough to recognize when something accurate had just been said. He looked at the senior analyst nearest to him. The analyst pulled up the relevant regulatory data on his laptop. He scrolled. He studied. "She's right," he said. The session adjusted. The recommendation was revised to build in a contingency for the regulatory scenario Nadia had flagged. The meeting ended 20 minutes later than scheduled. Damien Cross had been in the session, seated at the far end of the table, having joined for the final 40 minutes after his own morning schedule had allowed. He had arrived in the room at precisely the moment Nadia was speaking. He had heard the observation. He had seen the room respond to it. He did not look at her directly after she spoke. He looked at the data on the screen the analyst had pulled up, confirming the accuracy of the point. Then he looked at his own notes. But he was aware of her presence at the table, in a way that was sharper than ordinary professional awareness, and he did not examine that sharpness too closely. After the session ended, as the room was dispersing, Damien spoke quietly with Gary for a few minutes near the window. Nadia was across the room, exchanging a brief technical point with one of the analysts. She did not look toward the window. She was completely engaged with the conversation in front of her, the way she always was. Gary said to Damien, in a low voice, "Who arranged to bring her into this session?" "I did," Damien said. Gary looked at him for a moment. He was 61 years old and had known Damien for 9 of those years. He said nothing further and returned to his notes. But he thought about it on the drive home. He could not recall, in 9 years, Damien Cross personally adjusting the allocation sheet to add a junior fellow to a senior strategy session. He had seen Damien fast-track mid-level analysts into higher visibility roles. He had seen him restructure entire teams based on a quality of work he had identified. But he had always done it through formal channel, performance reviews, promotion recommendations, structured advancement. He had not done it by quietly adding someone's name to a document on a Thursday morning. Gary filed the observation away without drawing any conclusions from it. He was a careful man. He did not draw conclusions from single data points. But in the weeks that followed, additional data points arrived. 2 weeks after the strategy session, Damien added Nadia to a client dinner. It was a working dinner with the managing director of a European fund that was considering increasing its position with Crestwood. The guest list had been set for over a month. 4 senior members of the team, no junior staff. 1 week before the dinner, Nadia's name appeared on the updated guest list. No explanation was offered. She attended. She sat near one end of the table, made no effort to position herself prominently, and listened more than she spoke for most of the evening. When she did speak, it was to offer a specific technical point that had come up naturally in the conversation, and that she had genuinely relevant knowledge about. The managing director of the European Fund, a tall, measured woman named Dr. Elke Bauer, directed 2 subsequent questions toward Nadia during the dinner after hearing that first response. At the end of the evening, Dr. Bauer said to the senior partner who was managing her account, "The young woman at the end of the table, is she new?" "She is in our fellowship program," the partner said. Dr. Bauer nodded with the particular expression of someone placing a note in a mental file to return to later. Afterward, the senior analysts on Damien's core team began, in the discreet way of experienced professionals, to compare observations. Helen mentioned to Nathan that Damien had twice referenced Nadia's market analysis in internal conversations where Nadia was not present. Nathan mentioned to Helen that the fellow had been in 3 separate senior-level sessions in the past 6 weeks, which was unusual by any standard. Lucy, who worked as Damien's secondary scheduling assistant, had noticed that the calendar adjustments involving Nadia's name always came directly from Damien, rather than going through Patrick as the standard routing suggested. None of them said anything to Damien. Nobody at Crestwood told Damien Cross things that had not been solicited. It was not an environment built on that kind of candor, particularly when the observation involved the managing partner's behavior rather than a business problem. But the observations accumulated. Oliver, who had the social sensitivity that fast talkers often develop to compensate for speaking before thinking, noticed the pattern before Clara or Paul did. He mentioned it to Nadia directly on a quiet afternoon, when they were both in the shared workspace, and the room was otherwise empty. "You have been in 4 senior sessions in 6 weeks, he said. "Yes," she said. "That is not normal for the program. I am aware. Do you know how it is happening?" She looked at him. "I assume someone is finding the work useful." Oliver studied her. "You genuinely have no idea, do you?" he said. It was not quite a question. "I am focused on the work, Oliver." "The work," he said, and there was something in his tone that was not unkind, but was fairly knowing. "Right." She returned to her screen. She was not being evasive with Oliver. She was being accurate. She genuinely had not spent meaningful time thinking about the mechanism by which she was appearing on senior session invitation lists. She had spent that time preparing for the sessions so that she could contribute something real to them, whether the invitation had come from Damien Cross's personal decision or from a formal recommendation through the standard channels, was information she had not sought. She called Camille that Sunday, as she always did. They talked for an hour and covered the week's events. Nadia's account of the European Fund dinner made Camille laugh twice. "And Damien Cross was there?" Camille asked. "He was at the dinner, yes." "Did he speak to you specifically?" "He asked me a brief follow-up about the regulatory trend I had mentioned at the previous strategy session," I answered. That was the extent of the direct conversation. Camille was quiet for a moment. "What is he like?" she asked, not in a gossipy way, with genuine, focused interest. Nadia considered the question honestly. "He is the most directly capable person I have been in a professional room with. He processes information faster than anyone I have observed. He does not waste energy on things that do not serve the purpose he is currently working toward. He is probably the most efficient human being I have encountered in a professional context." A pause. "Is he a good person?" Another honest consideration. "I don't have enough information to answer that," Nadia said. "But you have a feeling." Nadia looked out the window of her apartment. The evening light was soft and low. "I have a question," she said, "which is not the same as a feeling." "What is the question?" "Whether the kind of clarity he has, the kind that cuts straight to the center of everything, whether it extends to the people around him, or only to the work." Camille was quiet for longer this time. "That is a careful question," she said. "It is the honest one," Nadia said. They moved on to other subjects. Camille's latest appointment, a book she was reading, the particular tea she had discovered that was helping her sleep more consistently than anything the pharmacy had offered. Nadia made a note of the brand. She drove to the pharmacy the next morning and bought 2 boxes. She drove them to Camille's apartment and left them on the doorstep with a note that said nothing except, "2 boxes. Be well." She drove to work. At her desk, she opened the project she was currently working on, a preliminary sector analysis for the portfolio strategy team that she had been asked to complete ahead of the next internal review. She focused on it completely for 4 hours, during which she was interrupted 3 times by colleagues and once by an update from Ruth about the fellows' mid-year review schedule. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, an invitation appeared in her calendar. The details were brief. A working group focused on the firm's emerging markets exposure, scheduled for the following Monday morning. The group listed included Helen, Gary, 2 external analysts, and Damien Cross. And, at the bottom of the list, her name. She read it once. She noted it. She opened the relevant emerging markets file and began reading. She did not examine the pattern. She did not allow herself to speculate about what it meant or where it was leading. She was at Crestwood to work and to honor what Camille had given her. Everything else was noise, and noise was something she had always been very good at not listening to. She read the emerging markets file until 6 in the evening. She drove home. She ate, reviewed her notes, and went to sleep at 10. In the morning, she went back. By the 5th month, the people closest to Damien Cross had stopped mentioning the pattern to each other. Not because they had decided it was irrelevant, but because there was nothing useful to do with the observation, and professional people with things to protect do not allow themselves to say what they are actually thinking, when thinking it aloud offers no advantage. But they all knew. Patrick knew, because the calendar told him. He prepared Damien's schedule with the precision of someone who had memorized the rhythm of another person's working life, and he could recognize a deviation from that rhythm the way a musician recognizes a note that is slightly off pitch. Damien had always been consistent in his professional behaviors. He arrived between 7:50 and 8. He moved through the day at a pace that was rapid but organized, one thing following logically from the next. He did not add items to his own schedule informally. Everything went through Patrick and was grounded in a clear professional rationale. Except, increasingly, things involving Nadia Reeves. The changes were subtle but cumulative. Damien began arriving at 8 minutes to 8 on certain days, which was earlier than his usual window. On the days he arrived earlier, Patrick noticed, the early arrival correlated with Nadia's own schedule, specifically, with the days she had been assigned to cross-departmental briefings that took place before the standard business day began. Nadia arrived at 7:45 on those days because the briefings started at 8 and she needed preparation time. Damien arriving at 7:52 on the same days was, individually, unremarkable. As a repeated pattern over 5 weeks, it was a data point. Helen noticed a different indicator. She was having her Tuesday morning review with Damien, a standing meeting they had kept for 2 years, covering the risk analysis department's current workload and any issues that required his direct awareness. Partway through the meeting, Damien referenced a specific adjustment Nadia had recently proposed to a client portfolio's commodity weighting. The reference was professionally appropriate and technically correct, but it was the 3rd time in 5 weeks that Nadia's analysis had been cited in this meeting. The analyses themselves were good. Helen would have acknowledged that independently. but Damien cited them with a particular quality of recall: precise, unprompted, and containing a level of detail that indicated he had not simply read the work once and filed it. He had read it and retained it with the kind of attention that usually meant the material had genuinely interested him. Helen noted this without commenting on it. Gary noticed during a board preparation session. He and Damien were reviewing materials for the upcoming quarterly board presentation, a process they completed together each quarter, which involved going through every major departmental update and ensuring the summary framing was accurate and strategically positioned. At one point, Damien paused over a section of the emerging market summary and said, without apparent awareness that the comment might be noticed, "Nadia identified a consideration here that I think should be incorporated into the board materials." The secondary weighting analysis she ran for the Monday group showed something the standard summary has not captured. Gary looked at him. Damien was already moving on to the next section. Gary followed. But the comment stayed with Gary, the way an unusual financial pattern stays with an analyst. A thing that appears once and might be coincidence, and appears again and might still be coincidence, and appears a third time and is definitely something else. Lucy, the secondary scheduling assistant, noticed during what she later described to herself as a completely normal administrative week. She had been covering Patrick's desk on a Wednesday afternoon while he was out for a dental appointment. A request came through on the internal system for a brief ad hoc workspace to be arranged on the 14th floor for a working review session. The workspace, a small conference room with a whiteboard and data access, was needed for that Thursday at 4 o'clock. The name associated with the request was, as was routine, the name of the person who would be using it. The name was Damien Cross. The 14th floor was the fellows' floor. Lucy arranged the room. She mentioned it to Patrick the following day, neutrally and without editorial. Patrick added the notation to his mental record of the week's small irregularities and continued with his morning. Nobody said anything to Damien directly. And Damien, who was, in every measurable external way, continuing to operate exactly as he always had, managing a demanding schedule with precision, and maintaining the output that had built his reputation, was experiencing something internally that he did not have a clean name for, and therefore kept failing to address. It had started small, the way most things that are eventually significant start small. After that first brief meeting with Nadia on the executive floor, he had noticed a quality of thought in himself that he was unaccustomed to. He was not a person who spent time thinking about other people's inner lives. He assessed people accurately and efficiently: capability, reliability, character, in the professional sense of those words. He did not speculate about what people were like in the unquantifiable human sense. It was not in his nature, or rather it had been trained out of his nature by years of an environment that rewarded precision and penalized the kind of soft thinking that cannot be justified with data. But he kept thinking about the sentence, "It is not a weak point. It is a known variable." He thought about it because it expressed something that he himself believed and had acted on his entire professional life: the idea that honest acknowledgement of uncertainty was a form of strength rather than exposure, but had never heard someone else state plainly in a professional setting. People did not say that in meetings. They obscured the gaps in their analysis, or they apologized for them. They did not name them cleanly and move on. He found this quality interesting, in the objective way he found genuinely unusual things interesting. He told himself this clearly and accurately, and it remained true for approximately 6 weeks. Then it became something else. He began noticing things he had no professional reason to notice. The fact that Nadia stayed at her desk through the midday lunch hour, on the days when she was in the middle of something analytically complex, not as a performance of diligence but because she was genuinely absorbed. The fact that she laughed with Clara and Oliver in a way that was natural and unguarded, which was its own kind of rarity in an environment where most social interactions were at least partially professional performance. The fact that in every meeting he had been in with her, she was completely present, not waiting for her turn to speak, not managing the room's opinion of her, simply attending to what was happening and responding honestly. He was also aware of the fact that she never seemed to notice him in a way that exceeded the appropriate professional register. He was not accustomed to that. He did not mean this in a self-regarding way. He was not the kind of person who required attention or sought admiration. But in 15 years of professional life, he had become accustomed to a certain response from the people around him. A slight adjustment, a sharpened quality of attention, a subtle performance of their best selves. It was not sycophancy exactly. It was the natural behavior of people who were aware that the most powerful person in the room was watching. Nadia Reeves did not seem to register his power the way other people did. She was entirely professional in her behavior toward him, entirely respectful in the appropriate way, entirely clear and responsive in the sessions they shared. But the slight adjustment that everyone else made in his presence, the small performance of being seen, was simply absent in her. She was the same in every room, regardless of who was in it. He found this, and he examined this honestly, unsettling. Not because it bothered him, because it interested him, and because it was the first time in a very long time that something about a person, rather than a problem, had genuinely interested him. He managed this by doing what he always did, with things that required more thought than the immediate moment allowed. He set it aside, and attended to the actual demands of the day. The calendar was full. The clients required his attention. The board preparation was ongoing. The emerging markets analysis needed his sign-off. These things were real, present, and required his direct capability. The situation involving Nadia Reeves was, he kept telling himself, simply a professional interest in a notably strong resource. He told himself this through October. He was finding it less convincing by November. The test he gave himself, without quite framing it as a test, was this. He would stop engineering reasons to include her in sessions that she was not formally scheduled for. The quality of her work was established. He had enough data. There was no professional reason to continue the pattern. He stopped for 8 days. On the 9th day, he was reviewing the preparatory materials for a risk mitigation workshop, and noticed that the emerging markets assessment she had contributed to the Monday group had not been fully integrated into the current framework. It was a genuine observation, not manufactured. It required addressing. The most direct way to address it was to have the person who had produced the original analysis walk through it with the workshop preparation team. He asked Patrick to add Nadia to the workshop prep session. Patrick added her name without comment. She attended the session. She walked through the analysis clearly and precisely. The team incorporated her contributions. The workshop materials were stronger for it. Everything was professionally appropriate. But afterward, Damien sat in his office with the closed door and the city visible through the window, and acknowledged, with the same directness he brought to every other honest assessment in his professional life, that he had not called for her because of the risk mitigation framework. He had called for her because 8 days of not having a reason to see her had felt, in the specific and quiet way of something that had changed without being announced, noticeably long. He sat with that information for a while. He was not a man who panicked. He was not a man who acted impulsively. He was a man who understood that the most important decisions were the ones you made after the longest, most careful thought, and that the worst outcomes in professional life came from acting on feelings before you understood where they were coming from. He decided to understand where this was coming from before he did anything about it. He reviewed what he knew about her, which was professional and factual. He reviewed what he was noticing, which was harder to categorize. He was honest with himself, which took longer than it sounds, because honesty about what is actually happening inside you is harder than honesty about what is happening in the world outside you. What he arrived at the end of an hour of careful internal reckoning, was this. He was interested in Nadia Reeves in a way that had started professionally, and had ceased to be purely professional. He was interested in the way she thought, in the way she moved through the world without needing anything from it, in the fact that she was the first person in a long time who made him want to know what she was thinking, in a room where they were both listening to someone else speak. He stood up from his desk, he walked to the window, he looked at the city. And then he did the thing he always did when he had correctly identified a situation that required careful handling. He decided to wait until he understood it better, before he said or did anything. He was, at this point in the story, still under the impression that understanding it better was something he could accomplish through deliberate effort and his own careful analysis. He was wrong about that. But he would not discover that for a while yet. There are things that people carry in professional environments that have nothing to do with the professional environment. They are carried in the background of the person, in the quality of their focus, in what they think about during the quiet minutes between tasks, in who they call during their lunch breaks when no one is watching. They are not performed and they are not hidden. They simply exist, the way everything true about a person exists, whether or not the room has learned to see it. The thing Nadia carried at Crestwood was Camille, not as a burden, not as a guilt. Camille had made her feelings about guilt absolutely clear on the night of the phone call. She had said, before they hung up that morning, "I need you to promise me one thing. I need you to go in there and work for yourself, not for me. The gift is getting you to the door. What happens inside is yours entirely," Nadia had promised. And she had kept the promise in the most important sense. Every decision she made inside Crestwood, every analysis, every contribution, every position she took in a meeting was genuinely, completely her own. But she carried Camille the way you carry the people you love most. Not in your hands, where it slows you down, but in your chest, where it does something else entirely. Where it reminds you what the work is for. Where it sharpens your attention on the days when attention is hardest. Where it turns ordinary effort into something that has a reason behind it. Every Sunday, without exception, Nadia called Camille. These calls were the one fixed, sacred constant in her week. They happened at 10 in the morning, when both of them were awake, and the day had not yet fully collected its demands. Nadia would make tea, not the particular brand Camille was taking for sleep, but the ordinary breakfast tea they had both grown up drinking, and she would sit at the kitchen table and call. The calls lasted anywhere from 40 minutes to 2 hours, depending on what there was to say. They covered everything. Nadia's week at Crestwood, described with the same honesty and specificity she brought to everything, because Camille was genuinely technically capable and found the financial details genuinely interesting, rather than diplomatically tolerable. Camille's week, her health, which was moving in the right direction slowly, and with the kind of progress that is only visible in hindsight, her books, the relationships in her own life, that she was tending carefully from the quieter pace her recovery required. They also talked about what Nadia was finding out about herself. That was perhaps the most unexpected dimension of the Crestwood experience. Not the professional progress, which was real and measurable and documented in her own journal in plain terms. But the personal discoveries, the things about her own nature that only became visible when she was operating at full capacity in an environment that genuinely demanded everything she had. She discovered, for instance, that she did not experience pressure the way most people around her appeared to. Not because she was indifferent to outcomes, she cared about her work deeply and constantly, but because her relationship to pressure was grounded in preparation rather than in performance, and preparation was something she trusted completely, because she had always been able to trust it. When she walked into a difficult session, she was never walking in cold. She had always done the work of knowing what she was walking into. The pressure was not absent, it was simply metabolized by preparation before it could become fear. She discovered that she genuinely liked people, which surprised her more than it should have. She had spent so many years in environments where she was slightly outside the main social current, the one who was reading while others were socializing, the one who stayed at the desk while others went for lunch, that she had developed a private theory about herself, that she was not naturally social. Crestwood disproved it. She found Oliver genuinely funny and appreciated his particular brand of quick-minded chaos. She found Clara's careful precision something she could learn from and admire. She found Nathan's patient expertise something she actively sought to absorb. She found Helen's composed authority a genuine model of professional womanhood that she had not known she needed to see until she saw it. She also discovered, during her 5th month, something that she had not been looking for, and that arrived with the particular surprise of a finding that changes everything quietly rather than loudly. She was reviewing old internal files as part of a research task for the portfolio strategy team. The task was to compile a background survey of the firm's engagement with particular sectors over the previous decade, a historical analysis to provide context for a current strategic decision. It required going back through internal records, cross-referencing entries, and pulling out relevant historical data points. It was routine research work, desk work, the kind that is not glamorous but is necessary, and that Nadia did with the same thoroughness she brought to everything. On the 3rd day of the research task, she was working through files from approximately 4 years ago. She was moving quickly, scanning for relevant sector flags, when a document title caught her eye and stopped her. The title was Declined Pitch, Initial Assessment, Bloom Capital Partners. She would have scrolled past it. The decline of a pitch from 4 years ago was not relevant to the current task, but the name Bloom Capital Partners snagged on something in her memory. She paused. She thought. She tried to place the name, turning it over in her mind the way you turn over a word you know you recognize, without being able to immediately say from where. Then it landed. She sat back in her chair. Bloom Capital Partners had been Camille's company. Camille had built it. Not the current illness, but the thing before the illness. The project that Camille had poured 3 years of her life into during the period immediately after graduate school. The startup financial advisory company that she had built from nothing, with 2 university friends before it had collapsed, before the diagnosis, before everything changed. Camille had sometimes talked about its end with the matter-of-fact sadness of someone who has accepted a loss without requiring it to be resolved. The company had not survived its 2nd year. The financial pressure had been too much. The funding had not materialized. They had shut it down. Nadia had known all of this. She had been close enough to Camille through those years to know it in detail. What she had not known, what she had had no reason to know, was that Bloom Capital Partners had ever pitched to Crestwood Financial. She opened the declined pitch file. It had been submitted 4 years ago. She read through the initial assessment document, which was the standard internal note produced when any incoming pitch was received and reviewed. The note was brief and contained no substantive analysis of the pitch content. It said simply that the pitch had been received, reviewed at the initial intake level, and declined. She looked at the name of the person who had handled the initial intake assessment. The name was Claire Hendricks. Nadia sat with this for a long moment. She breathed. She did not allow her thinking to move faster than her breathing, which was a discipline she had developed for exactly this kind of moment, when something lands that requires careful processing rather than immediate reaction. She returned to the file. She looked at the date of the decline notice. She looked at the date of submission. The pitch had been submitted to Crestwood's venture engagement desk and had been declined at the initial intake level 6 working days after receipt. 6 working days. No standard internal process for assessing a pitch of this type should have produced a decline in 6 working days without a substantive review reaching the senior level. The intake process, as Nadia understood it from her internal research over the past months, was supposed to include at minimum a summary review at the senior analyst level before any pitch was formally declined. The document she was looking at showed no senior analyst involvement, just the initial intake notation and the decline. Signed by Claire Hendricks. Nadia looked up the internal role associated with Claire Hendricks at that time. The file system's records indicated that 4 years ago, Claire Hendricks had held the position of Deputy Managing Director, second in authority only to Damien Cross himself. The pitch from Bloom Capital Partners had been received at Crestwood Financial 4 years ago. It had been handled by the second most powerful person in the building at the time. It had been declined in 6 working days without a substantive assessment reaching any senior level. There was no record of it being escalated to the managing partner. Nadia read through the limited documentation again. She was not looking for drama. She was looking for facts. The facts were these. Camille's company had reached out to Crestwood with a pitch 4 years ago. The pitch had been declined so quickly, at such a low level, that it had effectively been buried. The firm's managing partner, whose philosophy about emerging talent and legitimate analytical work Nadia had observed directly over the past months, appeared to have had no knowledge of it. And Bloom Capital Partners had collapsed approximately 14 weeks after the pitch was declined. Nadia had heard Camille say once, in the aftermath of the company's end, that if a single funding conversation had gone differently in those last months, they might have been able to hold on long enough to reach the next milestone, that the collapse had come from a sequence of closed doors rather than any single failure, that she had believed in the work right up to the moment when it became impossible to keep the doors open. The financial stress of that period, the long hours, the pressure of watching something she had built begin to fall, the months of uncertainty, had come before the diagnosis. The doctors had been careful never to say directly that stress had caused or accelerated anything. Medical causation was always more complicated than simple sequence, but the timing had been what it had been, and Camille had never quite been able to entirely separate the story of the company's end from the story of what came after. Nadia sat at her desk for a long time. She was not angry, not in the hot, immediate sense of that word, but there was something in her chest that was substantial and real and required time to be accurately identified. She identified it eventually as grief and clarity and the particular weight of knowing something true that cannot be unknown. She copied the file documentation carefully, following the firm's standard procedure for pulling historical records in research tasks. She placed the copy in a personal folder on her desktop. She returned to the main research task and continued the survey work for the next 3 hours, completing it cleanly and accurately. She did not call Camille that evening. Sunday was their day, and she wanted the week between now and Sunday to allow her thinking to settle into the shape it needed to be, before she said anything about what she had found. Camille did not need to receive raw, unprocessed information. She needed to receive what Nadia was sure of, clearly, and in the right context. She used the week to think carefully. She also used the week to learn more about Claire Hendricks. Claire Hendricks was no longer at Crestwood. She had left the firm 2 years ago, under circumstances that the internal record did not describe in detail. She had moved to a smaller firm in a different city. She had not, as far as Nadia could determine from professional records, maintained any public connection to Crestwood since her departure. Nadia thought about what she was holding. She thought about what it meant. She thought about Camille, and about the Sunday calls, and about the company that had been Camille's most ambitious attempt at something genuinely her own. She thought about Damien Cross. She thought about whether he was a good person, the question she had put aside months ago, the honest one, that she had told Camille she didn't have enough information to answer. She was beginning to have more information. The question was what she would do with it. The Crestwood Annual Gala was held on the second Friday of November, at a venue that occupied the top 2 floors of a building 2 blocks from the firm. It was not a flashy event. Crestwood did not do flashy. It was a structured, well-organized evening, a formal dinner followed by time for the kind of professional conversation that happens most usefully in rooms where people are not sitting behind desks. Clients, partners, senior staff, and a small number of select junior members of the firm. It was the one evening each year when the strict professional hierarchy of the building relaxed slightly, not into informality, but into a different configuration of formality. Fellows were not typically invited. Nadia received the invitation on a Monday morning, 3 weeks before the event. It appeared in her inbox alongside the standard week's internal communications, addressed personally to her, formatted identically to the ones that went to senior staff. She read it once. She noted that the invitation had come directly rather than through Ruth, who typically handled any fellow-related correspondence that involved firm-wide events. She replied with a confirmation, and returned to the project she was working on. She told no one in the fellow cohort about it. Oliver found out anyway. Oliver found out about most things through the specific frequency of professional gossip that only very social people can tune into, and he appeared at the edge of her workspace on Tuesday, with the expression of someone making a genuine effort to be professionally measured about something genuinely interesting. "The gala invitation," he said. "Yes," she said. "That has not happened before. To a fellow. So I understand." He looked at her. She looked at her screen. "Nadia," he said, in the tone of someone choosing their next words with actual care. "I think you should probably know what you're walking into." She looked up from the screen then. She gave him her full attention, because Oliver, whatever his other qualities, was observant in the specific way of people who talk to everyone and retain what they hear. "Tell me," she said. He sat down in the chair beside her workspace. "People have been talking," he said, not in a specific way, not gossip exactly, but the pattern of things over the last several months, the sessions, the dinner, the adjustments to how meetings are composed. People have connected the thread. "And what do they make of it?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Most people think it is professional recognition of strong work, which is the cleanest explanation, and probably the most accurate," he said. "But there is a smaller conversation that runs beneath that one." "About what?" He looked at her with the kind of honesty that she had always privately appreciated in him, because honesty in a social person is both rarer and more precise than honesty in a private person, because the social person knows exactly what they are choosing to say instead of other things they could be saying. "About whether the recognition is purely professional," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "And what is your view?" she asked. Oliver took a breath. "My view," he said, "is that you are the most capable person in this building under the age of 40, and I say that with the full awareness that I am also in this building and under the age of 40. And my view is also that Damien Cross is a person who has never, in the 9 years he has run this firm, behaved toward any person the way he has begun to behave toward you, and that those two things are both true and probably connected." She looked at him. He stood up. "I am not telling you this to create a problem," he said. "I am telling you because you are someone who functions best when you have accurate information, And I think the accurate information here is that the gala is not just a professional occasion for you. He walked away and returned to his own workspace. Nadia sat with that for a long time. She thought about Oliver's words carefully and fairly, which meant neither dismissing them because they complicated things, nor embracing them because it was appealing to have been seen. She thought about the pattern he had described, which she had noticed, but declined to interpret. She thought about what she knew about Damien Cross from months of careful, accurate observation. She thought about what she was carrying, the file on Bloom Capital Partners, the documented decline, the person she had found it related to. She thought about Camille. She called her on Sunday as usual. She did not mention the gala or Oliver's observation or the document she had found. She was not ready. The thinking was still in progress. Camille talked mostly about a book she had been reading, a biography of a woman architect that she had been finding genuinely inspiring. Nadia listened and responded and was present, which was its own form of care. She arrived at the gala on the second Friday of November, wearing a deep green dress that she had owned for 2 years and had worn once before. She had not bought anything new. She had not spent the week thinking about her appearance. She had spent the week thinking about the thing that mattered, which was the conversation she was certain was going to happen, and what she intended to say during it. The evening was well organized and moved smoothly through its formal section: dinner, remarks from 2 senior partners, brief acknowledgments of the year's significant achievements, the professional conversation that followed dinner. Nadia spoke with Nathan for 20 minutes near the entrance to the terrace, about a market development that had been in the professional news that week. She spoke with Dr. Elke Bauer, the European fund manager from the dinner months ago, for 15 minutes. Dr. Bauer remembered her name without prompting, and made a point of asking which department she was currently rotating through. The question was precise and friendly, and carried the quality of genuine professional interest. Damien was across the room for most of the first hour. He was doing what he did at professional events, moving through the space with purpose, not lingering, not performing sociability, making contact with the specific people who required his direct attention, and covering the necessary ground of the evening efficiently. He spoke with 3 clients, 2 senior partners, and the head of a firm that Crestwood had been in conversation with, regarding a joint initiative. He reached the terrace at approximately 9:40 in the evening. Nadia was already there. She had stepped outside 10 minutes earlier, partly because the room had become warm, and partly because she had known, with the kind of quiet certainty that accurate people develop about social situations when they pay close enough attention, that this was where the conversation was going to happen. The terrace looked out over the city from a high enough vantage point that the street sounds below were softened into something continuous and unremarkable. The light from the building's interior came through the glass doors and created a warm glow on the stone surface of the terrace floor. The air was cold and clear. Damien came through the glass doors and stopped a short distance from where she was standing. He looked at the city for a moment. Then he turned toward her. "You're the only fellow who accepted the invitation," he said. "Yes," she said. "Did that tell you anything?" he asked. "It told me the invitation was specific," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the city again. When he turned back, there was something different in his expression from the quality she had been used to seeing in professional settings. The professional quality was still there. It would always be there. It was too deeply built into him to go anywhere. But there was something beneath it that was present and unguarded in a way she had not seen from him before. "I want to say something to you," he said. "All right," she said. "I don't do this well," he said. "I want you to know that in advance. I am precise about a great many things. This is not one of them." "Then be imprecise," she said. "It will still be true." He looked at her for a moment, with something that was almost like surprise. Then he said it. He told her that she had changed something in the way he moved through the days at Crestwood, that he had spent the better part of the past several months trying to categorize what he was noticing, and had arrived at the honest conclusion that it did not fit neatly into any professional category, that he was aware this was not a simple thing to say, and that he was aware she had every right to receive it, with whatever response felt true to her. He told her that he wanted her in his life, in a way that was not defined by the fellowship program, or the professional context, or any of the structures that had so far contained the relationship between them. He did not use dramatic language. He did not perform the declaration. He said it the way he said everything that he was certain of, plainly, directly, without ornament. It was the most personally vulnerable thing Damien Cross had said out loud to another person in years. And he said it well, by his own standards, which were the only standards he had. Nadia listened to all of it. She stood still and listened, and did not soften her expression into the warmth that would have been comforting, but would also have been, in some important way, less than truthful. When he finished, she did not answer immediately. She looked at the city for a moment. Then she asked him a question. "Damien," she said, "do you know what it costs someone else for me to be standing here?" He looked at her. The question clearly was not what he had expected. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean exactly what I said," she said. "Do you know what it costs someone else for me to be in this building, in this program, on this terrace tonight?" He was quiet. He did not know how to answer because he did not yet have enough information to answer, and he was honest enough to know it. "I think," she said, "that before you make me any kind of offer, you need to sit with that question. You need to actually sit with it, not file it and move on. Because what I am carrying into every room at Crestwood is not simple, and what you are offering me is not something I can receive until I have been honest with you about all of it." He looked at her with an expression that was not confusion exactly. It was the expression of someone who has said something true and received, in response, something that is also true and does not fit with anything they expected. "Will you tell me?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "but not tonight. Tonight is not the right moment for it." She looked at him for a moment longer, and what was in her eyes was not coldness. It was not cruelty. It was simply the kind of complete, resting clarity that belongs to someone who knows exactly where they are standing and exactly what they know, and is not willing to pretend about either of those things for anyone. Then she went back inside. She spent another 40 minutes at the gala, speaking with Nathan and with one of the external consultants who had been at the emerging markets session. She was entirely present in those conversations. She was warm and engaged, and herself. Damien remained on the terrace for a long time after she went back inside. Patrick noticed, from across the room, that the managing partner had not returned from the terrace for over 30 minutes. He checked once through the glass doors, confirmed Damien was standing at the railing looking at the city, and made no move to interrupt. Gary noticed as well. He observed Damien's return to the room eventually, steady, composed on the surface, exactly as he always was, and he noted something in the quality of the composure that was different from the ordinary kind. Ordinary composure is the absence of visible difficulty. The composure he saw on Damien Cross when he came back inside was the presence of visible effort. Something had happened on that terrace, and the effort to carry it normally was visible, very faintly, to someone who had known the man for 9 years. Gary spoke to no one about it. The evening ended. The guests departed. The venue returned to its ordinary quiet. Nadia drove home. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table with the tea and the particular silence of late night, and she thought about what she had set in motion with the question she had asked. She thought about Camille. She thought about the file. She thought about what came next. She was ready for it. 3 days after the gala, on a Monday morning, Nadia sent a brief message through the internal system to Patrick, asking for a private meeting with Damien Cross at his earliest available time. The request did not specify a reason. It was professional and direct, the way all of her communications were. Patrick, without comment, offered her a 45-minute window on Wednesday at 10 in the morning. She confirmed it. She spent the 2 days between the request and the meeting doing something she had been doing for the past several weeks in varying degrees, preparing. Not the way she prepared for analytical sessions, with data and figures and a structured argument. This preparation was different. It was the preparation of someone who knows they are about to deliver a truth that will change the shape of a conversation permanently, and who wants to ensure that the truth is delivered accurately, without anger, without performance, and without any gap that could allow it to be misunderstood. She thought carefully about what she knew and what she wanted to say. She organized the facts cleanly. She thought about the tone she needed to carry. Not aggressive, not apologetic, simply honest. Honest in the way that Damien Cross himself was supposed to value, based on everything she had observed of him. Honest in the way she was always honest, which was the only way she knew how to be. She called Camille on Sunday. She told her everything. She told her about the file she had found, about Bloom Capital Partners, about the intake notation dated 4 years ago. About Claire Hendricks and the 6-day decline, and the absence of any senior review. She told Camille what she had pieced together from the sequence of dates, and what it might mean, in terms of what had reached Damien Cross's desk, and what had not. She told her about the gala, and the question she had asked on the terrace. She told her about Wednesday morning. Camille was very quiet throughout all of it. She asked 3 clarifying questions, each precise and technical, and about the specifics of the file documentation, rather than about the emotional content of any of it. When Nadia finished, Camille was quiet for a long time. "How are you feeling about it?" Nadia asked. Camille's voice, when she answered, was steady in a way that was not easy, but was genuine. "I do not know yet," she said. "It is a lot to absorb. The company. I had made my peace with it, Nadia. I had accepted that it ended. I had moved through it." "I know," Nadia said. "This does not change what I accepted," Camille said. "But it does change what I understood, and those are different things." They talked for another hour, about what Nadia intended to say on Wednesday, about whether it felt right to say it, about what they both believed the purpose of the conversation should be. Not revenge, not accusation, simply the honoring of a complete picture. The belief that Damien Cross was a person whose standard, at least in professional terms, had always been accuracy and completeness. The belief that he therefore had a right to the complete and accurate version of the story that his firm had been part of, whether he had known it at the time or not. "Are you doing this for me?" Camille asked at one point. "I am doing it because it is true," Nadia said, "and because the situation on the terrace last Friday requires honesty from me. I cannot receive what he said without being fully honest first. That would be its own kind of dishonesty." "And after you tell him?" Camille asked. Nadia was quiet for a moment. "I will say what needs to be said," she said, "and then I will do what feels honest after that." Wednesday morning arrived gray and cold. Nadia dressed with the same care she brought to any day that mattered. She arrived at the Crestwood building at her usual time, went through her morning routine, email, coffee, a brief review of the week's project status, and at 10 minutes to 10, walked to the elevator and rode it to the executive floor. Patrick was at his desk. He greeted her with his usual professional pleasantness and told her to go straight in. Damien was expecting her. She walked into the office. He was at his desk this time, not at the window. He was in the position of professional attention, seated, present, looking at her directly when she came through the door. He had said nothing about what she had done on the terrace. He had been in 2 professional interactions with her since then, a brief session on Friday, and a longer review meeting on Monday, and he had been entirely as he always was, professional, and composed, and exactly calibrated. But there was something in the way he looked at her now that contained the weekend's waiting. He had done what she asked. He had sat with the question. She could see that he had. She sat down across from him. She placed the folder she had brought on the desk but did not open it yet. "I promised you honesty," she said. "That is what I am here to give you." He nodded. She told him her name first, her real full name, which was not different from the name he knew. It was Nadia Reeves. That was true. But then she explained the rest of it. All of it. The phone call at 2 in the morning, Camille's diagnosis, the fellowship offer that had arrived at the wrong time, the conversation about whether it could be transferred, Professor Aldridge's willingness to rewrite the letters, the decision she had made, and the reasons she had made it, the portfolio she had supplemented with her own thinking until it was genuinely hers, the work she had done since arriving, which was real, and which had been her own, entirely, without a single borrowed idea. She told him about Camille, who she was, what she had built, what she was capable of. She told him about the Sunday calls and the way Camille had said, "Go and be brilliant." She told him why she had come to Crestwood, not to deceive anyone, but to honor something, and how she had carried that purpose every day she had been in the building. He listened to all of it without interrupting once. When she finished the first part of what she had to say, his expression was controlled in the way it always was, but there was something moving beneath the control that she could read, because she had been watching him carefully for 7 months. He was processing. He was assessing. He was determining what was true and what it meant. "The work," he said, "the portfolio, the reports, the analysis, all of it was yours." "All of it," she said. "Every word, every conclusion, every number." He was quiet for a moment. The entry point was someone else's name. Yes, the credential that opened the door was Camille's. Everything that happened inside the door was mine. And you believe those are separable, he said. It was not an accusation. It was a question about her own position, which was the exact right question. I believe they are separable because the results are what they are, she said. You can review every piece of work I have produced here, against any standard you choose. If the work does not meet the standard, the question of how I arrived here becomes relevant. If the work meets the standard, the question of how I arrived here is a question about the credential, not the capability. He held her gaze for a moment, then he said, the work meets the standard, it exceeded it. Yes, she said, it did. Another silence, different from the others. There is something else, she said. He waited. She opened the folder on the desk and placed 3 document pages in front of him. She did not narrate them immediately. She gave him time to read. He read quickly, the way he read everything, absorbing, processing, following the thread. She watched his eyes move across the pages. She watched the moment when he understood what he was looking at. She said, quietly and without dramatic emphasis, Camille built Bloom Capital Partners. That pitch was submitted to Crestwood 4 years ago. It was declined in 6 working days without a substantive senior-level review. The decision was made by your deputy managing director at the time. There is no record of it reaching your desk. Slowly this time. She gave him the time. The collapse of the company came 14 weeks after the decline, she said. The financial pressure of those final months coincided with the period that preceded Camille's health decline. I am not drawing a medical conclusion. I am not assigning blame for her illness, but I believe you have a right to the complete picture of what your firm was involved in during that period, whether or not you knew it at the time. He put the documents down. He said nothing for a long time. The silence in the room was not empty. It was full of the particular weight of something true that cannot be unfiled once it has been filed. Claire Hendricks, he said. His voice was entirely controlled. She handled the intake. He was quiet again. She could see him putting pieces together, the departure of his former deputy 2 years ago, the circumstances that had not been fully explained in the records, things he knew from his own history with the firm that she did not have access to. She did not press. She had said what she came to say. She had placed the truth on the table. What happened to it now was his to determine. I am not here to demand anything, she said. I am not here with anger. I am here because you offered something to me on that terrace, and I am not willing to receive anything from you, or give anything to you, without the complete picture between us. Whatever you make of this, what you do with the information, what you feel about how I came to be in this building, that is entirely yours to decide. She stood. Nadia, he said. She paused. He looked at her. For a moment, the man who had built the most efficiently run financial firm she had ever worked inside looked simply like a person who had just learned something that cost him something, not professionally, not reputationally, but somewhere more interior than that. I did not know, he said. I know, she said. That is not, he stopped, started again. That does not make it sufficient. No, she said, it does not. But knowing it was not your knowledge is accurate, and accuracy matters. She picked up the folder. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she walked out of the office, past Patrick's desk, and into the elevator. She stood in the elevator as it descended, and allowed the weight of what she had just done to settle through her completely. It was a substantial weight. She did not try to make it lighter. She returned to her desk on the 14th floor. Clara was in the room, working quietly. Nadia sat down, opened her screen, and picked up the project she had left the previous afternoon. She worked through the rest of the morning with her full attention on what was in front of her. She did not know yet what she was going to do next, but she knew what she had done just now was right, and that was enough, for the moment, to keep working. 2 days after Nadia's Wednesday meeting, Damien Cross arrived at work at 6:42 in the morning. Patrick, who arrived at 7:30 and had never, in 4 years, found the executive floor's lights already on when he came through the door, paused briefly in the corridor before continuing to his desk. He did not ask. He went about his morning preparation. When Damien came out of his office at 8 to begin the day's first items, his demeanor was precisely as it always was, focused, direct, calibrated. Patrick noticed nothing in the voice or the manner that would have given anything away to someone who had not spent 4 years reading the specific language of the man's behavior. But Damien had been in the building since 6:42, and the document that was sitting on the right side of his desk, the formal side, where things requiring action went, was a personnel file from 4 years ago. He had spent the 2 days since Nadia's visit doing what he always did when he needed to understand something. He went to the primary sources. He pulled the complete file on Claire Hendrix's departure from Crestwood. He pulled the full record of the firm's venture engagement desk from the relevant period. He reviewed every document in the Bloom Capital Partners intake file in its entirety, not just the decline notice, but the original pitch materials that had been received and filed at the intake level without advancing further. The pitch materials were competent, more than competent. They showed a clear, original analytical framework applied to a specific market gap that was genuinely relevant at the time of submission. It was the kind of pitch that, under the firm's stated standard for venture engagement, should have been advanced to a senior analyst review, rather than declined at intake. There was no documented justification for the intake level decline. There was no note indicating why the senior review step had been bypassed. There was only the decline notation and the signature. Damien had a very long memory and a very precise understanding of the period in question, because it had been a complicated moment in the firm's history. A period of rapid growth, several significant personnel changes, and a restructuring of the venture engagement desk that had moved it under Claire Hendrix's direct oversight. He had trusted the oversight. He had given the desk autonomy because he had trusted the judgment of the person running it. He had not known about this particular pitch. He had not known, and not knowing it had not been negligence. The desk had been operating within a delegated authority structure that he had legitimately established. But he was also honest enough to hold two truths simultaneously, that he had not known, and that the outcome of not knowing had been a specific harm to a specific person that would not have occurred under the standard the firm was supposed to maintain. Both things were true. Both things mattered. He also spent those 2 days thinking about Nadia. He thought about everything she had told him, not the professional dimension of it. He had reached his position on that clearly and relatively quickly, because the professional dimension was actually the simplest part. The work was real, the results were real. The manner of entry was procedurally irregular, yes, but the substance was genuine and entirely defensible on its own merit. He had hired people before who came through unusual channels. He cared about what people did, not about the administrative neatness of how they arrived. What he was thinking about more slowly, and with more difficulty, was the other dimension, the personal one. He had stood on the terrace at the gala and told Nadia something true, something that had cost him more than he had expected, because he was not in the habit of telling people true things about what he wanted, and the effort of not being accustomed to it had been visible to him even if not to her. She had not received it with warmth. She had not received it with rejection either. She had asked him a question that he had not been able to answer, and then she had gone back inside, and then 3 days later, she had come to his office and given him the most honest account of herself and her situation and the things she had found that he had ever received from any person he had worked with. He thought about what it meant to have received that, to have been given someone's complete truth without softening, without performance, without any calculation about what the truth would cost her or gain her in the receiving. He thought about the fact that she had come to tell him about the Bloom Capital Partners file, not because she was making a demand of any kind, not because she was building a case, but because she had told him she was not willing to receive what he had offered her without complete honesty between them first. She had told him the most complicated truth about herself, because she would not have it any other way before accepting anything from him. He sat with the understanding of what that meant. And when it fully landed, when he felt the actual weight of it, without the professional framing or the analytical distance he usually applied to things that were difficult, what he felt was a specific kind of respect that he had not felt for another person in a very long time. The kind that is not about capability or achievement. The kind that is about character. The kind that arrives when you understand that someone is constitutionally incapable of being less than honest, not because they lack the imagination to be otherwise, but because it is simply not in their nature. He went to her office on Friday. Not the executive floor. He came down. He walked to the 14th floor at 2 in the afternoon, which created a brief pause in the ambient sound of the floor, the way any unexpected presence in a room creates a pause, and he asked if he could speak with Nadia privately. She stood, and they went to the small conference room at the end of the corridor, the same room that Lucy had arranged weeks ago at Damien's request. He sat across from her at the small table. He told her he had reviewed the full Bloom Capital Partners documentation. He told her his assessment of what had occurred and what it meant under the firm's own standards. He told her he intended to formally review the processes under which the venture engagement desk had operated during that period, and to implement corrective measures. He told her that the harm to Camille's company, while not arising from his direct knowledge or decision, had occurred under his firm's name and his leadership of it, and that he took full responsibility for what a firm produces, regardless of what the managing partner personally knew. He said all of this precisely and directly, without any bid for sympathy or understanding. Then he said the rest. He told her that what she had done, coming to tell him about the file, giving him the complete picture when she had no obligation to do so, and when doing so clearly cost her something, was the most personally honest act he had witnessed in a professional context in his career. He told her that the offer he had made on the terrace remained, that he was not withdrawing it and had no intention of withdrawing it, that he wanted her to know it was genuine and had nothing to do with her position in the firm or what she had just told him. He also told her he understood, if none of that was what she wanted to hear. Nadia looked at him for a long moment, and then she said something that she had spent the previous 2 days arriving at, slowly and honestly, and without giving herself the easy answer first. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear it clearly." He waited. "I came to Crestwood for Camille," she said. "That was the reason I was willing to walk in. The work I have done here has become genuinely mine. I have made it mine. Every day, with everything I have. But the purpose underneath it was hers. I came to honor what she gave me. And I have done that. I have done exactly that." She paused. "And now, I need to do the next thing honestly," she said, "which is that I am not in the right place anymore. Not because of what I found in the file, not because of the complications of how I arrived, but because I came here with a purpose, and the purpose has been served, and staying past the point where the purpose is served. Staying because it is comfortable, or because it is impressive, or because of what someone on a terrace said to me at a gala. None of those are the right reasons to stay." He held her gaze. "I have something I need to build," she said. "It is mine. It is not Crestwood's, and I cannot begin it while I am inside here. Not because Crestwood is wrong, because I am ready to step outside of it." He was quiet. "What I can offer you," she said, "and what I am genuinely offering, is the truth, all of it, which you now have. And what I cannot offer you is a different answer to the question of what comes next for me, because the honest answer is that it does not lead back into this building." He said, "What if I asked you to stay?" She said, "Then I would tell you the same thing I just told you, because asking me to stay does not change what is true for me, and you have had enough people in your life telling you what you want to hear. I think you know what honest looks like when it is in front of you." He was quiet for a long time. She could see the effort it took, the particular effort of a man who was accustomed to being the person who resolved things, who found the solution, who moved the obstacle, discovering that there was a category of thing that his capability did not extend to, that there are decisions that belong entirely to another person and remain there, regardless of what you want or offer. "All right," he said, eventually, quietly. She nodded. She resigned the following Wednesday. She gave 2 weeks formal notice, which she spent completing everything on her current workload, with the same thoroughness she had brought to everything else. She handed over her projects cleanly and without gaps. She spoke with Helen and Nathan and thanked them honestly. She had lunch with Ruth, who received the news with the calm of someone who had learned not to be surprised by people with clear purposes. She had a brief, easy conversation with Oliver and Clara and Paul, who looked at her with expressions that ranged from understanding to something that was close to admiration. She cleaned out her desk on the last day, which did not take long, because she had never accumulated more than the essentials: a few books, a small notebook she had filled, and a new one she had started. The photograph of herself and Camille that she had kept in the desk drawer where no one could see it, which she had looked at approximately once a week on the days when looking at it helped. She walked through the lobby at 4:47 in the afternoon, on a Wednesday in December. George at the security desk said, "Have a good evening," and she said, "You as well," and meant it completely. She walked out. She did not look back at the building. Not because she was performing strength. She had nothing to perform for anyone. She did not look back because she already knew what was behind her. A year of real work, honestly done, in honor of the person who had given her the door. And what was ahead of her was something that was entirely hers. No borrowed entry, no door held open by anyone else. She sat in her car in the parking structure for approximately 10 minutes, not crying, not celebrating, simply sitting with the particular stillness of a transition that has been chosen rather than happened to, which has a different quality from all other kinds of change. Then she called Camille. "I'm out," she said. Camille was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Clear," Nadia said. "I feel completely clear." "Then that is exactly right," Camille said, and her voice had in it the same warmth it had always had, steady and genuine and proud in the way that does not need to announce itself, because it has been there all along. Nadia started the car. She drove home through the winter evening, the city moving around her in its ordinary busy way, entirely indifferent to the fact that something significant had just concluded, and something else had just become possible. The city was simply doing what cities do, and Nadia Reeves was simply doing what she had always done, moving forward. The first thing Damien Cross did, after Nadia's last day, was sit in his office for 41 minutes, with the door closed. Patrick knew, because the closed door was unusual in the middle of the afternoon, and because the 41 minutes were long enough to be noted without being long enough to be alarming. When Damien emerged, he was entirely as he always was, and the day continued, and Patrick did not remark on the 41 minutes, and the afternoon passed as afternoons do. But something in the building had changed. Not structurally, not in any way that would appear in a quarterly report or a board agenda. The change was not measurable, and it was not, on the surface, visible, but it was there, and the people who knew Damien Cross well enough to read the fine calibrations of his behavior would, over the following weeks and months, begin to accumulate their observations about it the way they had accumulated observations about the pattern when Nadia was in the building. Except this accumulation moved in the opposite direction. When Nadia had been at Crestwood, the pattern had been one of expansion, Damien arriving earlier, moving with a slightly higher quality of energy, routing things differently, thinking about the shape of the day in a way that contained the awareness of another person's presence. It had not been obvious, it had not been announced, but it had been there, in the small indicators that a watchful person notices. Now the pattern was one of contraction, not failure. Damien Cross was not the kind of man whose professional performance collapsed under the weight of personal difficulty. The work continued to be excellent. The firm continued to run at the level it had always run. The clients were satisfied, the strategies were sound, the returns were consistent. Everything that Crestwood was professionally continued to be exactly what it had been. But Helen, in their Tuesday review meetings, began to notice that Damien was more direct than usual. Not impatient, not even close to impatient in any way she could have easily described, but there was a quality of compression in him that had not been there before. As though he had decided, at some level that did not surface in conversation or behavior, to occupy less space than he had been occupying, to ask for less. Gary noticed during the December board meeting that Damien's engagement with the long-form strategic discussion, the 40-minute conversation about the firm's 5-year positioning, that Gary had always found to be the moment when Damien was most fully himself, most animated, most willing to argue for a position he believed in, against anyone who held a different one, was present, but quieter. He made the arguments, he made them well, but the particular fire that had characterized those arguments in every board meeting Gary could remember was burning lower. Gary thought about it afterward. He was a careful man. He did not draw conclusions from single data points. But this was not a single data point. Patrick noticed that the weekly allocation sheet for January was prepared with fewer personal adjustments than usual. Damien made 2 corrections that were professionally straightforward and consistent with his standard reasoning. The allocation sheet did not contain any additions that departed from the standard framework. He had gone back to normal process, in every observable way. The normal process had been fine before. Patrick had the particular sadness that an observant person feels when something that was interesting becomes ordinary again. He said nothing about it. In January, 3 weeks after Nadia's departure, Damien made 2 decisions that were connected to what he had learned in the November meeting. The first was the formal review of the Venture Engagement Desk's historical processes. He commissioned a complete audit of the intake procedures for the relevant period, with a specific focus on the standard for advancing pitches from intake to senior review. The audit took 4 weeks. Its findings confirmed what his own review of the Bloom Capital Partners file had shown, that the intake process during that period had been inconsistently applied, that a number of pitches had been declined at the intake level without the required senior escalation, and that the authority delegated to the desk's oversight function had not been accompanied by adequate accountability measures. He restructured the process. He also, after careful consideration, instructed the firm's charitable foundation to establish a grant in the name of emerging financial advisory businesses. The grant, formally named the Bloom Initiative, with no public explanation of where the name came from, offered funding and mentorship to early-stage financial advisory startups founded by people who demonstrated genuine analytical capability and lacked access to the networks that more established firms took for granted. It was structured, funded, and operational by February. He did not publicize the connection. He did not offer any public explanation for the name. He simply had it done, and ensured it was properly resourced. It was not adequate. He knew it was not adequate. You cannot restore what cannot be restored. The years, the energy, the particular company that Camille had built and watched collapse. But it was the most honest response available to him, and he was a person whose relationship to his own failures was determined by what he actually did about them, rather than by how he felt. He also stopped keeping the sticky note with Nadia's name on the side of his monitor. Not dramatically. He simply noticed it one morning in January, and realized there was no longer a professional reason for it to be there. He removed it, placed it in the drawer, and sat down to begin the day. It was still in the drawer in March. He knew it was there. He did not examine why he had not thrown it away. He did not examine it at all. He simply continued. The people who had watched the pattern when Nadia was in the building watched the subsequent months with the particular attention of professionals who have observed something human and unexpected in a place that is not usually associated with human and unexpected things. They watched Damien work. They watched him continue to be the best at what he did. They watched him build and protect and extend the firm he had created. They watched the quality of his professional output continue to be completely indistinguishable from what it had always been. And they watched, more quietly, the way the relentless forward momentum that had always characterized him, the specific quality of someone who is always moving toward the next thing, because the next thing is always visible and always compelling, had changed in some way that was difficult to name. It was still there. The momentum was still there, but it had a different quality, as though the destination was clear, but the reason for arriving at it had become less certain. Gary had a conversation with Helen in February, briefly, over coffee in the kitchen on the 12th floor. They talked about the board meeting that was coming up. They talked about a client matter that required coordination between their departments. Then there was a pause, and Gary said, not quite casually, "He is different, you know." Helen looked at him. "Not in any way that affects the work," Gary said carefully, "but different." Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, he is." They finished their coffee. They returned to their respective days. They did not expand on the subject, because there was nothing practical to be gained from expanding on it, and they were professional people who understood where professional conversation ends. Meanwhile, across the city and gradually across the months, Nadia Reeves was building something. She had known before she left Crestwood what the shape of it would be. The idea had been forming quietly during the final months of the fellowship, in the background of everything else. A boutique financial advisory practice focused on mid-market clients, who were analytically sophisticated, but who had historically been overlooked by larger firms, in favor of the institutional business that generated larger fees. She had identified the gap clearly. She had a detailed assessment of what it would take to fill it. She had the skills, the knowledge, and, importantly, the 7 months of direct experience at one of the most rigorous firms in the country, where she had operated at the senior level and produced work that had been documented and acknowledged. She also had the particular quality of motivation that comes from choosing something entirely for yourself, with no borrowed purpose beneath it. She had honored what Camille gave her. Now she was building what was purely hers. The first 3 months were the kind of hard that is not frightening but is simply relentless. She worked from a small rented office space that she shared with 2 other independent consultants. She made calls. She attended every professional event that was relevant. She built her first 3 client relationships through the network she had begun to develop at Crestwood, professionals she had met at the sessions and the dinner and the gala who had taken note of her work and remembered the impression. Dr. Elke Bauer, The European fund manager from the gala dinner sent her 2 referrals in the first 6 weeks. Nadia called her personally to thank her. Bauer said simply, "You were the most interesting person in the room that night. Good work finds its way." By the end of the first year, the boutique practice had 8 active clients and a reputation in the specific professional circles that mattered for exactly the qualities she had always demonstrated: precision, honesty, and the particular kind of reliability that comes from someone who tells you what is actually true, rather than what you are hoping to hear. She moved her office to a larger space in the spring of the second year. She brought on 2 analysts, both young, both clearly capable, both the kind of people who had been the best person in their previous rooms without anyone adequately noticing. She trained them the way she had always worked, by modeling complete honesty and complete preparation and letting the standard speak for itself. She moved closer to Camille in the autumn of that year. They found apartments in the same building, 2 floors apart. They had dinner together on Thursdays. The Sunday calls became Sunday mornings in Camille's kitchen, which had a better coffee maker than Nadia's. Camille's health had continued to improve, slowly, consistently, with the particular stubbornness of a person who has decided, clearly and without drama, that they are going to get better, and has simply continued acting on that decision every day. Camille had also begun, in the second year of Nadia's practice, to contribute, not formally at first, just conversations, the way they had always had conversations, where Camille's sharp technical mind found its way naturally into the problems Nadia was working through. Then more formally, as a part-time analytical contributor, working from her apartment on the days when she had the energy, at the pace that her health allowed. Nadia had not asked her to do this. Camille had proposed it. And Nadia had accepted it not as a completion of a circle or a satisfying narrative ending, but simply as the honest next thing, because Camille was capable, and the work was real, and the practice was hers to fill with the people she trusted most. In the professional world, word traveled the way word always travels when someone is doing something genuinely well, quietly at first, then less quietly. The boutique practice's reputation grew, in the circles where reputation is built on quality and accuracy, rather than on marketing or scale. Damien Cross heard about it through 2 separate professional contacts in the same month. The first was Gary, who mentioned in a sidebar at a dinner that Nadia Reeves had built something interesting in the mid-market advisory space. Gary said it with the careful neutrality of someone who had noted the information was relevant and was delivering it accurately. Damien nodded. He did not add anything. The second was a client at a quarterly review who mentioned, unprompted, that they had recently spoken with a boutique advisor who had given them an assessment that was more useful than the last 3 reports from a larger firm. Damien asked the name of the advisor. "Reeves," the client said. "Nadia Reeves. Have you heard of her?" "Yes," Damien said. "I have." He did not say anything further about it. He thought about it on the drive home. He thought about her in the way he had been thinking about her for the past year and several months, in the specific, quiet, ongoing way of something that has found a place in a person's mind, and stayed there not through force, but through simple, persistent relevance. Not as a presence that disrupted his thinking, as a presence that informed it. A standard he had been given, unexpectedly, by someone who had walked through his firm for 7 months, and then walked away, leaving behind both a record of exceptional work and a very clear picture of what genuine honesty looks like when it is practiced without apology. He arrived home. He went through his evening routine, the same order, the same efficiency that had always characterized his personal life as completely as his professional one. He was, by any external measure, exactly as he had always been. But there was a quality in the evenings now that had not been there before. A quality of specific quiet, not loneliness, exactly. He had never been a man who required company in the ordinary sense. Not regret, exactly. He was not a man who permitted himself that particular indulgence. It was something more precise than either of those words. It was the specific awareness of a man who had been shown something real, genuinely, completely, honestly real, at a point in his life when he had been moving so fast and so effectively toward everything he had built that he had not been certain real was something he was still capable of receiving. And who had not been ready for it when it came? He did not reach out to her. He had understood, in the November meeting and in the conference room on the 14th floor, and in every honest reckoning he had done since, that there are some things you do not earn back by wanting them, that some people are not placed in your story to be kept. that the most important thing she had given him, the most lasting thing, was not the 7 months of exceptional work, or the complete honesty on the terrace, or the truth about Bloom Capital Partners, or any of the specific things. It was the understanding of what a person looks like when they have a reason for everything they do that has nothing to do with what anyone thinks of them. He had never, before her, understood how rare that was. He had built the best financial firm in the city. He had negotiated, managed, led, and produced at a level that very few people in his field could match. He had made decisions that were large and consequential, and usually correct, and the few that had been wrong he had addressed directly and thoroughly. He had done all of this. And every morning, he sat in the corner office, where the city was visible through the window, where the light came in at a particular angle, in the early hours, before the building filled with the day's work, and he felt the specific and lasting weight of a man who had been given a complete picture of what real looks like, and who had not moved quickly enough toward it, and who had watched it walk out the door on a December afternoon at 4:47 without looking back. He worked. He always worked. The firm was magnificent. The results were undeniable. But the engine had something different in it now. Something that was not absent and was not broken. Something that was simply quieter than it had been. A long, specific, irreversible awareness of what had passed through the room he occupied and what it had cost to have the world move forward without it. Nadia Reeves had given her sister's place a second and genuine life. She had told the most powerful man in the building exactly who she was, where she came from, and what his firm had been part of, without anger and without apology. And then she had walked away, whole, clear, and entirely her own. He never recovered. Not from what had happened. From what he had learned, from the particular, irreversible knowledge that he had been in the presence of something genuine, and had discovered it only as it was leaving. Some lessons arrive at exactly the right moment. Some arrive just slightly after the moment in which they could have changed the outcome. The latter kind are the ones that stay.